I'm told I have 40 minutes to tell you everything you're ever going to need to know about typography. I've spent 20 years learning about it, so this is the biggest bargain of the conference. I'm handing out some books, a book that I wrote called Typography for Lawyers. No, you don't have to pay me, they're free. I don't think there's quite enough for everybody, because I know not everybody wants a free thing. But if you want one, please take it, and if you don't want it, please don't take it. A lot of the material is also online for free, so this isn't your last chance to get all the goodness. And I'm going to be referring to it a few times during my talk, but if you don't have one, it's all right. Speaking of which, I should get my notes. All right, we'll get to this in a second. Typography. Typography and programming have more in common than you might think. Because before computers, the most amazing and wonderful machines in the world were type founding and printing machines. If you know anything about old industrial printing, if you know about the monotype machine, if you know about the amazing linotype machine, which at the time was pretty much the most complicated thing in the world, these were all inventions that were made to further the written word. And I think of computers and programming as kind of just the next step in that, and the web too. It's the written word, it's symbols, it's taking ideas and moving them out. The other interesting thing is that typography and high technology have a long history together. In fact, before you all represented the technology industry, we all represented the technology industry. We were the cutting edge. And really, type design, among all the design disciplines, has kind of the most, how you want to say, kind of rubs up against the cutting edge of technology. And there are a lot. I work. I'm going to use two terms in my talk: typographer and typography. That's when you're designing anything that involves type, whether it's on a screen or on a page. Now, when I talk about type design, I'm talking about somebody who actually makes fonts. Now, I do both. I make fonts, so I'm a type designer. I also do work designing with fonts, which makes me a typographer. I also happen to be a lawyer, which is why there is a book in your hands called Typography for Lawyers, and more about that in a second. But I was telling you about the relationship of typography and design. It was all the way back in 1994 that I went to a type design conference in San Francisco, and I saw my two friends, Eric and Just, walking by. I said, Eric, Just, how are you? They're from the Netherlands. Don't get to see them that often. I said, what are you guys doing? And they said, oh, we're working on a new programming project. And I said, that's great. What is it? You're programming with PostScript? They were into that. And Just said, no. We're programming, we're using this great new language my brother invented. Like, what's it called? And he said, Python. Guido van Rossum is the brother of Just van Rossum, and Just and Eric van Blokland are type designers. And in fact, Python has, I know you're not all Python people, but I know some of you are, Python has a long history now being integrated with type design tools. So a lot of us who do type design for a living also end up doing a lot of programming, Python programming and other kinds of programming. So this is a fun conference for me to be at. In fact, this is why I came, because when Eric Holscher emailed me, thank you for inviting me, Eric, I said, sure, I'll come speak, because I've used your documentation. I've used Read the Docs. I like it. So if this is a little something I can do, then great. Now, at the time, Eric and Just were doing a lot of Python. I wasn't doing any Python at the time, in 1994, because I had to, I was learning this. Does anybody know what this is? C programming language? If you wanted to program a Macintosh in 1994, you couldn't use Python, but you could use C. And they were working on their projects, but I was working on a programming project, to develop a software program that made it easier to do kerning. That's not a word I expect you to know, but kerning is this process in type design where after you're done with the font, you kind of go through and adjust specific pairs of letters to make them fit better. Every type designer hates doing kerning. So like a good programmer who's lazy, it's like I was lazy, I'm going to look to programming tools. So I had to learn C. Now, I love this book, just as a work of documentation, as a work of typography, as a work of ergonomics. Look at this book. Look at how big it is. Look at how thick it is. You pick up this book. Do you want to learn the C programming language? Yes, you do. It's just like, it's like the secrets. They're wafer thin, right? the most important programming language ever, and this is the size of the book. In fact, if you've got a copy of Typography for Lawyers in your hand right now, I want you to notice something. Notice something about the thickness. Now, you're like, I thought this guy was coming to talk about typography. Why is he talking about book thickness? Well, I want to talk to you about reader attention. Because when people think about typography, they often start by like, oh yeah, typography, making it pretty. Great. And as a typographer and a type designer, I'm like, I wince a little bit, and I feel bad about that because typography, it's not about making it ugly, right? We do want things to look nice, be easy on the eyes, but the purpose of typography is not to make things pretty. Typography has a functional purpose. And to the extent that it is making it pretty, why isn't making it pretty? Well, I'm going to contend that it's about conserving reader attention, okay? Reader attention, the most important resource that you have as a writer. And this is something that you as writers of documentation have in common with lawyers. By the way, why write a book for lawyers? Lawyers actually are the biggest publishing industry in America. They are bigger than books, magazines, and newspapers put together. All they do is write for a living. And so I thought, well, geez, these are people who should know something about typography, and people whose work entirely depends on reader attention, whether that attention comes from another lawyer or from a judge. But as documentation writers, you're all in the same bucket too. You're trying to get people to pay attention to the docs, because docs aren't just a way of explaining how to do things with a tool. They're also a way of getting people interested in a tool, a way of explaining the culture around a tool, like why does it exist and why should you care? And again, if somebody stops paying attention, you're dead. Okay, that's it. You just lost your chance. It would be like I were standing here on stage, but all of you had already gone home. What's the point? Okay? And I think that's, when I talk about the way a book looks, and this is something that a lot of authors don't really, I feel like books have gotten, well, I'll show you what books have done. This tells you a lot about what Kernahan and Ritchie felt about how the C culture should be, right? It should be like small and tight and easy to grasp. And to me, I'm like, that's a great thing. And it was really important to me, for instance, to write a book so that when a lawyer picked it up, it's like, oh God, not typography again. It's like, no, it's something manageable. Whereas, take another book off my shelf. I'm not going to take this back to LA. Here's the least important programming language of the last century, Applescript. Okay. Now, with apologies to Mr. Segoyan, this book is nearly 900 pages. What is there to say about Applescript that takes 900 pages, right? It's a piece of shit. So, it's just like I hold this book up, and then I hold this one. Oh, God, no. You don't want to know whatever's in that book, right? You're going to keep on walking when you see this. Now, I want to be nice here, but, my Python friends, I was at your local bookstore here, the Powell's, very lovely bookstore. What is that? What the hell happened, Python? When'd you get so fat? That's why I liked you. You were so lean and mean, and oh my God. And the thing is, we've gotten, what it is? It's the electronic books, right? Because I have a copy of this on my laptop. I didn't really know how big it was. It's 1,600 pages. If the author of this book is here, I'm really sorry. That's too damn big, okay? That is not Python. I'm the worst Python programmer in the world. Does anybody disagree with me? That's a horrible representation of what programming Python is about. That's the name of that book, Programming Python. Even the Learning Python book is 800 pages. God, could you imagine a worse advertisement for a language? It's like, way to turn people off. And whatever. O'Reilly, this has been the story of their life. I used to like their books a lot, but now they're way too big, so screw you. So far, so good. So, we're in this interesting age of, I like this one, I don't want to. So, docs then versus docs now. This isn't like a good old days story. But you know what? 20 years ago, this is as good as docs got. And, typographically, it's pretty plain. But you know what? I love it. Because it's just so lean and mean. You get in, you get what you need, you get out, everything. The writing is just very simple, and it's everything you want out of documentation. But, in 1994 there, I'm toiling away in my little apartment. I didn't have, there's no internet, there's no Google, there's no Stack Overflow. this book was it. You couldn't find it in here, you're done. And so, so things change, right? So now, I mean, that's the difference now. It's like whatever problem you have with software, you can go on Google or Stack Overflow and you can find the answer. I mean, somebody else has had that problem. So that's the good news. So in a way, I so prefer today's age of documentation and that you've got access to this hive mind. But in another way, and again, I don't want to be the cranky old man, get off my freaking lawn, but it's made people a little bit lazy about documentation. Not all of you here, you all came to a conference about documentation, you must really care. But there's a sense in which it's kind of like, well, it's the web, whatever, people can Google it, they're not really going to be paying attention. It's like there's just not as many works of documentation that represent this level of care and precision. And it's like, I miss that a little bit. And again, that's something that I was very much going for in this book, which is kind of in its way a weird little form of documentation about typography for this audience that really doesn't want to know about typography. They really want to get back to whatever they were doing a few minutes ago. Making people pay attention. That's really the big thing. Now, so let's talk about real typography here. I think I promised you that, I'm going to tell you the 4 key rules of typography. But before that, I just want to tell you, because I know that some of you all probably know a little bit about typography, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what I mean when I'm thinking about typography and why typography matters. Now, have these books kind of mostly made it around? Is everybody within? I see them. Okay. If you've got a book handy, turn to page 18. This is why typography is important. For those of you who don't have a book, it's just a picture of the butterfly ballot from Palm Beach, Florida in the year 2000. This work of jackass typography got us into war. Yeah? No? I think so. I mean, come on. I mean, the amazing thing is somebody thought it was a good idea. A bunch of government officials went and said, that looks like a good idea. If you got the book in front of you, below it is the thing that's not the ballot. It's actually a redesigned ballot by some friends of mine, designers in Texas, that shows what the ballot could have been. How it could have, you could have just arranged the type on the page differently, and it would have been clear, and then we wouldn't have had to go to war, like 4 wars or whatever it is now. So it's just like the idea that typography doesn't have consequences. And again, the issue of reader attention, it's right here. What's the problem with attention here? The problem is that the ballot kind of made sense if you had 20 minutes to look at it, but your voters, you're coming into a booth, you vote, you go home. You don't have that much attention. So that was a big mistake that ballot made. Very sorry to hear that. So once people see that, they're like, okay, you've sold me. If we can change the course of history with typography, we can probably change other things. So I'm going to quickly, now the first part of this book, again, I'm talking about what's in the book. The Typography for Lawyers website is up and it's free and it has all this information. So I'm not here to sell anything. I already gave away the book, so silly me. But I just want to run through a few kind of definitional issues so it's clear what I mean. What is typography? Well, typography, I just think of it's the visual component of the written word. And when I talk to any audience, I don't say, I'm going to teach you how to be a typographer, because you already are a typographer. If you are putting words on a surface that are going to be read, you are doing typography, right? Maybe you're not doing it very well, maybe you're not putting that much thought into it, but there you are. And my goal is to make you a better typographer. So, well, what sort of things don't have typography? Well, I'm here speaking on stage. There's no typography here because it's verbal communication. There's lots of texts on your laptop, right, stored on the SSD drive, but there's no typography. But as soon as that, those appear on screen, typography is involved. And sometimes you hear today, like people talk about like undesign or no design. I don't really know what that means, because there's no way to show a reader a text without bringing in typography. I mean, texts, they're information, right? You can just represent them as a stream of whatever, Unicode glyphs. There's no visual representation until you pick a font and you put it on the page. If you want to turn to page 22, if you have a book in front of you. This is something that I go over with lawyers a lot, but just the idea that, writers often write, you have the most interest in your topic of anybody, which makes you the best qualified person to write about it. The problem is that your readers don't give a shit, So there's this huge gap of it's like you're the best qualified person to persuade them, but at the same time, they're kind of skeptical. They're like, you know what? I got so many things to read today. Why? Why should I read your thing? And again, obviously writing better and writing shorter is important. I know you've got a speaker later today who's going to talk about writing shorter, and pay attention to that lady for sure. But typography is another thing you can do. And because people talk about, you don't make any judgments about typography. But how about this? Turn to page 26 and 27. Here's a spread of 2 resumes. And I show this to lawyers, because they're skeptical, but I say, look, if you were looking at these 2 resumes, and let's say if you had 2 seconds to make a decision about which one of them to give an interview, which one would it be, right? And I contend to you, it doesn't matter which of these resumes you pick, but the thing is you are going to pick one, and the only way you're going to pick it is based on the typography, because you don't have time to read it. And in fact, if you were to sit here for 30 seconds, you'd notice that all of the information on the 2 resumes is exactly the same. So these are the same 2 candidates in substantive terms. So I'm just saying, when people are in a rush, they do make judgments about things based on typography. Typography can draw them to the product, or typography can repel them. You're walking by the bookstore, should I learn Applescript? No, I'm not going to learn Applescript. It looks like a giant painting. Go to Powell's. There's so many languages in the world. I'm just like, no, I can basically tell by how many books there are. If there are more books about it, I don't want to know about it. It's just like, there's a problem with that language. It's like just something that's like all the secrets of computing in like 200 pages. That's it. That's the book for me. That guy or the gal knows something. And then finally, what is the source of all these rules? Well, I claim that the best source of rules for typography for any professional writer is professional typography. And maybe that wasn't always the case. I mean, certainly those of us who work in, technology writers have always had a little leg up in terms of having better typesetting technology. But, the technology that we all have on our desks today to make great-looking documents, make great-looking typography, it's pretty much identical to the professional print shops of even 20 years ago, right? So that the gap has really shrunk a lot. Obviously we don't have typewriters anymore, but if you look, even you all went to college, right? It's amazing how many college papers and professors still want documents to be submitted in the old, 1-inch margins, 12-point type, double-spaced lines. That's what we did on typewriters. Why are we still holding on to it? Now, you're all saying, yeah, but I don't produce printed documentation. I'm on the web, man. Well, the web has its own set of problems, because I've been around the block, people. I remember the early web, and a lot of ways we are still reenacting all those bad habits from back then. And I want to show you some documentation here, and I'll point that out as we go. But it's like I've used the current web, I've used CSS. Again, I don't like it, but you can do a lot with it, and it's not that hard. And so we should try to kind of distance ourselves from the way things were done on the web in 1996, because it's no longer current. Okay, so I promised you the 4 things you need to know about typography. Here they are. This is, I won't call it the most valuable 5 minutes of the conference, but for some of you it might be, so pay attention. All right, there's a couple good features of this book. Many good features. One is there's HTML codes for everything. So don't think I ignored the web. No, I did not. But on the inside front cover, there's the summary of key rules. Okay, look, everything on this page applies to you, even if you're doing web-based documentation. And I would say if you get from thing 1 through about thing 13, you're going to be so far ahead of everybody. But we're just going to focus on thing 1. And in thing 1, there are 4 sub-things. So let's just get into that. The notion of why is it one document typographically appealing and another one typographically awful? Well, you want to know, I'll tell you. I will contend that the secret to success, as it were, in typography is what your body text looks like. Body text. What do I mean by body text? I just mean the text that's the main part of the document, not the, let me show you here. Okay, you see that? Yes, bottle, Python web framework. So the body text, so the stuff in the center here, right? I don't mean the stuff, all this is the body text. That's like a logo, that's some links, that's installation, this is all blah, blah, blah. This is the frame, this doesn't mean anything. Over on the side, there are these little tabs. No, the body text. Now, why does the body text have the greatest influence on how your document looks? Well, duh, there's more of it than anything else, right? So, of course, because it's the most prevalent ingredient in your, the cupcake that is your document, however it looks is going to have the greatest influence. So far, so good? Okay. Now, there are 4 factors that influence the appearance of body text. And again, if you ignore the rest of my talk, retain these 4. And because I always recommend you start with these 4 decisions when you're thinking about typography because they are so consequential. And again, if you think of nothing else in the rest, the typography, this will help. Okay, thing 1, font choice. All right? Actually, there's a lot to say about font choice on the web, isn't there? Used to be that we only could really use the fonts that were built into our computers. And then Microsoft came along and distributed more fonts like Verdana and Georgia. A lot of people think like Verdana and Georgia, those are the great web fonts. Yes and no. They were the great web fonts for 1996, okay? And even the man who initiated those projects at Microsoft, the late Bill Hill, thought we could do better. Even the man who designed those fonts, a friend of mine, Matthew Carter, understands that they've they were suited for a particular era. What was special about 1996? Well, most computer screens were a lot smaller than they are now. They were about, 13, 14 inches, 800,000 pixels wide at best. The other thing is that most of them didn't have anti-aliasing. They were all just black and white pixels. So Verdana and Georgia and that era of typefaces were all kind of engineered for those particular requirements. So I'm not saying that they look bad in today's era. It's just that they've been kind of eclipsed by display technology. I mean, now that we have devices and laptops with 250 or 300 DPI and anti-alias, it's like, oh my God, if we'd had that in 1996, screw Verdana and Georgia, we would have done something else. So you don't have to use them. Now, the other problem is, though, that we do have, sometimes there can be licensing restrictions, right? You're saying, well, I don't want to go and rent a big expensive font. I mean, there are services like Typekit now that you can get fonts for reasonable prices. If you don't like that because you're more of an open culture person, you might say, well, I'm going to go to Google and download their free fonts. I have a problem, as some of you might know, with Google's whole rebop about their open source fonts. I just want to say 2 things about the Google fonts if you're tempted to use them. Almost all of them are awful. Thing 1. And it's not because they have to be awful. I mean, I enjoy open source. I worked at an open source company. I'm a big believer. Those fonts aren't open source, though, because they don't reflect any sense of collaboration, right? The reason open source software is good is because a lot of people look at it and, everybody raises it, right? Makes it better. Most Google web fonts are just, the work of one person in isolation, somewhere in Antarctica. And when they're done, it's like, okay, put it on Google Web Fonts. And the other problem is, all of Google Web Fonts is, I'm not being a conspiracy theorist. This is just a fact. I mean, it's part of Google's way of tracking your travels through the web, and they harvest that information and they resell it. So if you must use them, at least download them yourself and host them yourself so you're not contributing to that. So, there are a few good ones out there. There are other free fonts available that are not bad. One that I like pretty well is called Charis, which is actually based on Matthew Carter's 1987 design charter. Charter itself was actually put into the public domain by Bitstream in 1991. They contributed to the X consortium. I'm pretty good with this stuff, right? You weren't expecting this. And you can still find it lurking around certain Linux distributions. So if you can find it, it's actually free. It was part of Charter and Bitstream Vera, which is the monospaced font, which also became the basis of Menlo. And if you want a free sans serif font, Adobe just released a nice one this past year called Source Sans. Comes in about 8 weights with italics and so on, entirely free. So those are all like great fonts and better choices than just the usual Arial and Verdana. Okay, so that's font choice. Not everything that needs to be said about font choice. Obviously, as a type designer, I could go on, but I just wanted to say that all of that affects how your document's perceived. Should you care about, you should try them, because you know what? The thing is, like, when you use Arial or Times New Roman, you're kind of using the font of last resort, right? It's not really a font choice so much as the absence of a font choice, right? Like, the blackness of deep space is not a color, because there's no light there, right? You're just kind of looking into the void. And when I look at a page, and again, I understand I'm sensitive, so even if I take off my little type snob tiara for a few seconds, it's just, when I see Arial, I'm just like, of course, you're like Good Housekeeping. They use Arial too. So, you know what? Changing your font takes like 3 seconds, right? So, why not? It can make such a big difference in your document. And that's really the thing. I wouldn't push the font thing so hard if it weren't for the fact that I knew what a big difference it can make, both in the legibility of your document, the professionalism, how people respond to it. I know it because I live it, and people email me all the time saying, dude, I got your font. It makes such a huge difference. I'm winning more cases. Some guy actually did email me that. I said, I don't want to take credit, but okay. Okay, that's thing 1 in body text. Thing 2, point size. This is another good one for the web. We have this idea that the default point size of the world is 12 point. That's a holdover from typewriters, and it kind of got baked into the computer age, probably I think at the Macintosh, because it became the default font size on the Macintosh, and then of course Windows ripped it off and so on. Out in the world, like if you look at professionally printed documents, very little, you're never going to see 12-point type. It's just too big. Most professionally printed type is going to be between 9 and 11, maybe 11 and a half. The problem with 12-point type in, say, a newspaper, book, or magazine, in addition to just seeming large, it uses more paper, too. So that's why lawyers sometimes like to say, I don't want to make things 11-point because I'm sending it to a judge and he's got bad vision. It's like, the judge reads the New York Times. The New York Times type is set at like 8 3/4. So, what's the issue there? But the web has had a funny kind of opposite problem. Early on the web, going back to that 1996, because screens were so shitty, the easiest way to improve the way text looked was to, easiest way, because you had so few pixels to work with, if you wanted to fit any reasonable amount of text on the screen, you had to shrink it. So the web has this whole culture of teeny fonts, which we can kind of see here. I'm not going to pick, by the way, I'm going to show some documentation I think has bad typography. All these projects are very worthy projects programming-wise. I'm just picking on the typography. I love you all. If you're here, I'm sorry. It's nothing personal. I picked out some documentation that I've actually run into in my work, so I kind of have can base it on my personal reaction to things and explain what does and doesn't work. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, tiny type. So yeah, again, we're in an era where screens are a lot bigger, and a lot of screens have higher pixel density. So it's okay. I always thought like more than 12 point, maybe like 13, 14, 16 point can be, even on the web, if you do it in pixels, like 18, 19, 20 pixel actually can work pretty well. At the end, I'll even show you a technique you can use to dynamically scale the pixel size of the type on your web page. But don't be afraid to make your type bigger on the web. We've got the technology now, and we shouldn't be afraid to use it. Next thing, line length. Line length is really one of my favorite topics to discuss because in addition to font, this is the thing that really almost everybody gets wrong in typography, and it's so easy to get it right. It's so easy to get it right. Line length. What do I mean? I mean the distance from the left to the right side, like from this edge right over here. Okay, what's the problem with really wide lines? They're just uncomfortable to read. And whether they're uncomfortable to read as a sort of like psychological, perceptual thing, let's leave that aside. The fact is we're used to reading blocks of text within a certain parameter. And that parameter is, oh my goodness, I'm going to get it wrong. Let me get the exact number here. Line length. Isn't this handy? I actually use the index to find things in my own book because I have memorized it all. Yes, line length, 45 to 90 characters. Characters. Why do I talk about it in terms of characters rather than ems or centimeters or whatnot? Because when I tell you a measure in characters, you can use that anywhere, regardless of the type size. Isn't that great? It's like, the Planck constant or something. It always works, 45 to 90 characters. And in fact, there's an even simpler formulation 2 to 3 lowercase alphabets. That's how wide a block of text should be. 2 to 3 lowercase alphabets. Let me show you here. I have inserted some alphabets that's not actually part of the documentation up here. There's 1 alphabet, there's 2 alphabets, there's 3, and oh, the text keeps going about another half alphabet. That's too long, okay? Let me show you a quick redesign that I did. A redesign that I did, no, I don't claim this is great, but I just did this goofing around in like 15 minutes of this Bottle website. It's like, if I can do this in 15 minutes, you can do it in 15 minutes. It's just not hard, okay? But let's look here. What's one of the big things I've done? Well, I enlarged the type size, but I kept the div width the same. And now you can see 1 alphabet, 2 alphabets, 3 alphabets, but you see it's dangling out. Really, my text block is around here at about the 2.5 alphabet mark. That's just a dirt simple, memorize. This is platinum now. I've gone past gold. This is amazing. You're programmers, you love simple rules of thumb. This is it. This is like the perfect typography rule for the lazy, okay? I use this though. It's a great, because it works, okay? So again, what happens when you get too long? When you get too long, it's just the eye it's so far to travel from the end of this line to the beginning of the next one. It gets uncomfortable. And that's really a big thing. So now on the web, again, traditionally, we've had this problem with really wide lines. Let me go over here. Python LexYak. Anyone know this? This is a great one. Oh, now I'm going to let this guy off the hook, David Beasley, because I've used this tool and it's freaking great. And this documentation is great too. He's not even trying to do typography. He's just kind of saying, I'm going to go 1995 web. And I'm like, all right, it's like an homage to a previous generation. But, there was but this is terrible, right? The original old school responsive design, just whatever, all the way to the edge. Nobody can read this. And again, it wasn't as big a problem in the 90s because the screens there wasn't that far you could stretch your windows. So it was like, okay, I guess that still works. But nowadays, it's a big problem. And maybe you've got, well, we're going to talk about Sphinx in a second, which is, let's talk about Sphinx right now. I'll skip that one. All right, so I know this is the old Sphinx, but let's go to the new Sphinx, right? This is new Sphinx, right? Okay, still, it's 2013, we are still running lines all the way to the edge, okay? This is not good. It's not good. This does not survive the alphabet test. So please figure out a way to improve your typography, do it this. And I know that this is kind of my biggest objection to responsive design. I'm not going to criticize. I think it has a lot of good things going for it. But the problem with responsive web design as a technique is that it doesn't really respect this fundamental rule of typography. When I go to responsive sites, the designers seem free to manipulate everything on screen, but they just let the text go wherever it goes. And to me, then you're really doing the reader a disservice. Again, I'm going to come back to these and talk about these sites in a little more detail, so don't worry that the abuse is over. That's what I have to say about line length. And then the last thing is line spacing. By line spacing, I mean the vertical distance between lines. And again, so I can give you my exact... I know. Okay, 120 to 145% of the point size. Again, another dirt simple little range for you. Again, I give you some discretion. You can pick whatever you want in there. Some fonts will want a little more space, some less, but it's relative to whatever your point size is. And so you see how things start to cascade down. You've got your viewport or whatever your text width is going to be. That's going to suggest a point size so that you get the alphabet test working. And then once you've got that working, you can use the 120 to 145% to set the vertical space. If you use something like Microsoft Word or Pages, it happens, people have to use these things. If you go into, the way to get 120 to 145% is not to use single or double or line and half spacing, that doesn't work. You want to go into your paragraph formatting box and pick the exactly option. Exact line spacing is available in WordPerfect, in Pages, in InDesign, pretty much every typesetting program I've ever seen. It's never available, though, from the main formatting menus because the main formatting menus have all the typewriter options on them, right? So feel free to break out of the 1940s and use your computer for what it's good for. All right. So those are the 4 major things you need to know. Those are the 4 factors that influence the appearance of body text. And tried to give you some, a little bit of guidance in terms of what works, but there's still discretion for you to do what you wish. So let's go and look at some specific examples. So that's our own Python book. Okay, what can go wrong? This is documentation that I do not like at all. LXML, a great project, works very well, but look what happens when you shrink it, right? Oh no. And here's the best part, though. I don't know about you, but I like to do software work on my laptop, so I often have my my code window on one side and my browser on the other. If you try to scoot this over, it goes under this. It's like, and there's nothing you can do about this block over here. It's like, it's stuck. Okay, I mean, this is just, and a German guy did this, right? I thought they were friends of typography. This is very surprising. This is pretty bad overall. It just makes me angry. And typography shouldn't make readers angry, but it will. Oh, it will, believe me. You can lose people. I know this is old Sphinx. I haven't used Sphinx personally. I know that a lot of Python projects use it now, and obviously it's part of the Read the Docs project. Here's my problem with this. I mean, I mentioned line length being essentially indefinite, right? You could have 10,000 pixels if you wanted. My other problem with this, and I know that this is probably like an old default template, but I mean this whole sort of giant block of color on the left, okay? That's what CNET did in 1995 because that's all you could do because you had to make like a GIF background that was repeating vertically. It's annoying. Why is it annoying? Because anytime you put something big and dark and greenish blue on the screen, that's where the reader's eyes go. It's very distracting. And also just the general notion that we have to fill the whole screen with, the smaller the screen gets, the greater percentage is filled with this stuff. Okay, you could say we need the menu there. Yeah, but then I scroll and the menu's gone and it's just an expanse of blue that has no purpose. All right, I know I can click it, but you know what? It's like, why not just get rid of it? I mean, come on. Or, that's the kind of thing, if you like the responsive techniques, you could just make it disappear on its own. So again, no need for excess. I kind of feel like, again, as a typographer, as a writer, as a reader, what your readers are coming to your documentation site for is to do some reading. So the text, the text on the page has got to be the main thing, the hero of the whole deal. All of the adornment and nonsense, it's like maybe it's cool the first time, but 10 minutes later it's really annoying. So strip it out. Here's a project. Typography also can kind of communicate to people whether you're serious about your promise to people. Look at this, Cherry Pie, a minimalist Python web framework. I come to a page like this and I'm like, all right, you people are cool. You're right. You say minimalist, you're talking the talk, but you're walking the walk. There's not a lot here. Okay, I'm going to go to the documentation. And it's like, oh, God, here we go again with the red bars and the text going, right? I'm like, you lied to me. You said you cared about minimalism. You don't care about minimalism. You're with these people. Had it with you, Cherry Pie. I'm sure it's a great project. I didn't end up using it. I use Bottle. I like Bottle a lot. It's definitely a cool little thing. But what's the problem with the Bottle website? Well, the Bottle website has, again, the kind of 90s cruft around it. Oh, people are going to be really bored by my website, so I have to make things happen. I have to make, I have to have a big logo in the corner. It's like, God, that's what's, what do you need a big logo for? Are you a Good Housekeeping magazine? I don't understand. It's just, you don't need to freaking brand your site. People know they're at the Bottle site. They typed it into their bar, okay? Let it go. They know they're at Bottle, all right? Here's another thing. The thing that really catches the eye, as I mentioned before, anything that's dark on the page, okay? That's why bold formatting is always more eye-catching than italic because it's actually darker. That's why bigger type is more eye-catching than smaller type because it takes up more dark pixels. That's why bars of color are more eye-catching. And the problem with this website is just all of these, and these are all forms of emphasis, right? And so you should use them. Oh, God, by all means, use them. But use them for things that you want to emphasize, not for things that are not worth emphasizing. Somebody's coming here, they want to know about what the hell the Python web framework can do for them. They don't care about all this stuff. But really, it's almost as if this whole frame thing is in the foreground, and it's like, oh, and then there's some documentation, whatever. So, I just say it's like, don't get into this whole emphasizing everything. So here, this is like a suggested redesign, right? What have I done here? Oh my God, you can even have this kind of, ooh, it's spooky, it comes on. You can do this. It took me 15 minutes, okay? But the idea that you make the documentation the main thing, put it front and center. In general, about emphasis, right? You see this example, hello world in a bottle, download and install user guide. Headings are another area that people get into trouble with because there's just this notion like, well, I'm using 11-point type. What should I use for the heading? How about 29-point type? It's like, no, that's more than twice as big. You just need to make that just noticeable difference, right? How about just a little bit bigger? How about 13-point? It can work. The other thing that works very well on the web, because you have unlimited space, is using white space, right? Put a lot of white space between things, between lines, above headings. It works. It reduces clutter. It makes things easier to follow, and it's really the best, subtlest way of doing things because you're not putting any new pixels on the page. I have a few more minutes, so I'm going to go a little faster. Again, another Sphinx site. Hey, these guys, I want to give them credit. They went out and found some fonts. Looks better than the usual. Still haven't really addressed the line length. Still have this kind of, well, as you get down, the orange disappears, but good enough. Chameleon, again, this guy's getting the hang of it. You see a more subtle palette. This is pretty cool. You could use some better typefaces. I like that note box, right? Look at that. I mean, in this whole page is just made of subtle, like blues and grays and black, and then boom, this green bar. I mean, that really works as a form of emphasis. Your eye is immediately drawn to it, and it works better because not everything else is screaming for emphasis. This is the new Python documentation that uses a new default template. Again, I think things are getting better here. We see that obviously somebody listened to my talk before I came here, but that we see the disappearance of the green stripe on the side. Yeah, you don't need this stuff. Really, just keep erasing and erasing. You'll find that you can really get away with a very, with much less, how do we say, like manipulation of point size and color and so on. Here's a great website for a thing called Robofab, which you'll never use, but it's a Python library for font designers, and done by Eric and Just van Rossum. Sorry about that image. But I mean, I love this site because look, the text is the right width, could be a little bit bigger, but every page has a nice a similar style where you've got the object name at the top, you've immediately got the code sample and so on. This is a great fun site. Now again, the guy who did it is a designer, so he's got a little bit of an advantage, an illustrator, so he can make a funny picture that maybe you can't. But there's nothing wrong with putting some personality and some humor into the design of the documentation. Helps convey what it's about. And finally, because I have one more minute left, an amazing demo of CSS font scaling. How do you get around the problem that when you resize a viewport, everything gets thrown off? Well, here's how I get around the problem. I just make the type scale, okay? And this is something I like a lot because you see that it's jumping around a little bit, but more of the resizing is happening in the type size itself rather than just re-breaking all the lines. And what that means is that as the reader scales the viewport, the line length actually stays at a better ratio, right? It stays and then at a certain point, I flatten it out. Here's how to do that. You just want a little bit of free hackery. Why are you laughing? This is just this one Python loop that generates all this. This is just media queries, right? So for each max width, okay, I reduce the font size a little bit, and you're like, that's ridiculous. Like, yeah, but it's a Python loop. It takes no time to generate this. Paste it in, and boom. And the neat thing is you can do all sorts of, it always works because it's strictly CSS, and you can do different things with this. Like I've done it in a linear relationship between pixel size and font size. You can imagine making it nonlinear. You can imagine making a max size, hit a max size and maybe flatten out, or hit a min size and flatten out. So there's all sorts of neat things that people are not doing at all in terms of making font size responsive. And I know that you are like the geniuses, and you can take this kind of knowledge and run with it. So there you go. Now you have the power to make great typography. I thank you for having me, and good luck.
And does anybody have any questions?
Oh, questions.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Go one over here.
Yeah, really quick one. What's like your all-time favorite font?
For what? What's your all-time favorite color? What's your all-time favorite number? I mean, for what?
No, I'm just kidding.
What did you say? Comic Sans? No.
No, I said purple. Yeah.
Purple, oh yeah, I'm a type designer, right? So I kind of feel like everything has its purpose. I've designed fonts, all sorts of fonts for different purposes. Like I designed a monospaced one for when I want to do my code in my terminal. I designed a serif one for when I want to do legal briefs. So there's not one answer to that. And why didn't I get a beer? Come on. I mean, speaking at this guy, I see there's a bar. Come on.
I want to know if you have any advice or guidance on using sans serif versus serif fonts. Because I think in the old school world, people used to say, well, you need to use a serif font if you're going to do a lot of body text. It's easier on the eye. And, sans serifs are meant for other contexts. Do you have any
I think that's
advice on that?
A reasonable question. Some people think that sans serifs are like the new trend in typography. They were actually invented in the 1810s, so they've been with us a while now. I would say that in print, it's true, at least in America, that we use serif type more as body text. So if you were making printed documentation, I'd say, yeah, certainly, for instance, with lawyers or students or others, I'd say just put it in a serif. On screen is a little bit different, especially at small sizes, because actually I think sans serif really does work just as well, sometimes better, because you've just got fewer features in the glyph, each glyph that have to render properly. So in certain cases, especially with small type, sans serif can be better on the screen. So I would say that on screen, do what you will. In print, use a serif.
Hi, could you talk a little bit about kind of adaptive technologies and other languages, especially like other alphabets, using other alphabets, and making
what do you want to know about them? There's certainly
good?
a lot of them. I mean, what aspect of it are you asking?
So we're designing websites for the city of San Francisco, which requires that all websites be in Chinese, Spanish, and English.
Ah, okay.
And also, good to have it be accessible to people who need adaptive technologies.
Yes. You're saying, do I have like a 30-second thing that will solve all your problems? No. I mean, that's probably one of the most complicated typesetting problems there is. Just ask the guy who had to tap out the Rosetta Stone. I mean, because you're dealing with languages that go in different directions. And, I heard from a lawmaker, for instance, in Canada, where all the laws have to be written bilingually. So they're always running into this problem that French, just takes up more space on the page. And what do you do? I'm not going to try to answer your question because I don't have an easy answer. I think it's very complicated. And I'm sorry I don't know more about it.
We're going to one more downstairs, and then I'm going to go and catch the people upstairs. So hold on.
So in a lot of the Python documentation you were showing, I saw that it had justified lines. Do you have any opinion on that, if it has a place on the web or not?
Justified lines. In print, I would say, whether you like justified or left aligned is kind of up to you. If you do justify text, you should always hyphenate, because the way a justification engine works is by spreading the words in the line. And if you don't hyphenate, there's just fewer spots for for the break to happen, and you can get these big gaps. On the web, the problem with the web is that most web browsers don't support what's called fractional spacing. I actually think Firefox does now, but I know that WebKit doesn't. And that's something that you really need to get the sort of precision. So what happens is that in justified text, things still look a little bit not quite as even as they ought to. In general, I prefer, on the web, I prefer the look of left-aligned text for that reason. But hopefully, the technology will catch up. Certainly, for example, with PDF, it's great to do justified text, but PDF has its own text rendering engine in it that supports fractional spacing and can handle setting text with that kind of precision.
Upstairs, folks. Oh, okay, one right here.
That lady from San Francisco is like, you know about that other shit, why don't you know about this? I'm sorry.
Hi, can you recommend a sans serif that would work really well in print and on the web? One of your favorites or a couple of your favorites?
I don't know, what's your budget? It's really a lot about, fonts. Sometimes people in the type industry get criticized for being like the Dr. No, right? Like, we want to have license. It's like, the thing is, type really isn't like software. Most type designers are not making zillions of dollars either. I mean, it's craftspeople. So I think the answer to that question is hard without knowing, like, do you want to do it, in print web? Is it apps? Is it, who are the readers? What are the types of screens? Because, there are just so many fonts out there, so many type designers with different, it's like every font solves a problem. Every font is a tool. So the more you can the more you can define the problem, the better able you are to get to the font that matches it. So.
Okay, any more? Oh, here.
I would say, there's a great way to do more typography is just to, look, it's the web. It's like you can click on stuff and find out what it is. Or in the world, if you have a printed sample of something, there's things called What the Font, where you can put in a scan. I think you can even do it on your phone. It'll tell you what font it is. So, I can identify thousands of fonts by sight, but you can't. So that's a great tool to find out, hey, that's a cool looking document. What's that font? And you can find out, see if you can afford it. Is there another question?
Yes, I have a question. Do you have any rules of thumb for the sizes of fonts for heading styles so that readers can easily differentiate between a heading 1, heading 2, 3, and 4, et cetera?
You mean between headings?
Yes, so you can understand the hierarchy. Like my eye can't really pick out the difference between, let's say, a 12 and an 11 point font.
Well, I'm with you, but I think that there's two issues there. One is I think that writers should not create documents that have 100 levels of heading, because no reader is ever going to follow this. And this is an issue with lawyers too, frankly, because they write, it's like 1A, 3B, D. And then by the end, they're doing these headings. It's like, it's only an inch wide and it's bold, italic, underline. It's like, oh God, So the point of a heading, what is the point of a heading? It's to communicate is it your tool? No, it's a tool to show to the reader. It's like signposts, right? Here's what's happening in the document. So if you go and make this document with like 14 levels of headings, like nobody's going to get it. So I really think that 3 levels is the max that humans can comprehend, and 2 is even better. Again, even if that's not the way you think of your document, that's the way you should format it visually. And then once you do that as a writer, once you simplify it, then it's really easy to make a differentiation, right? Because you don't have to worry about like, oh, everything has to be 2 pixels bigger, and then it's getting enormous by the end. Then you can do what I was saying before about making the subtlest distinctions that you can. And remember, like I was saying, big headings, you can save the big emphasis, like, oh, I want to knock it out, I want it to be white type on a dark bar. Yeah, you can do that for header 1, but for everything else, kind of play it cool. Again, you can just making something a little bit different works a lot better than you think. Give it a chance. You don't have to, again, adopt that old web habit of just going crazy with the formatting. Is that good? All right.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.